Gress.
I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Utilities Advisory Commission. Can the clerk call the roll? You're going to call the roll?
Vice Chair Greg Scharf,
Present.
Commissioner Motter,
Present.
Commissioner Croft,
Present.
Commissioner Phillips,
Present.
Commissioner Forcell, absent. Commissioner Metz, absent. Chair Siegel, absent.
It looks like we have a quorum. So, any agenda changes, deletions? Seeing none. Do we have any public comments?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to make a public communication, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. No hands raised.
All right. Seeing no public comments, can I have a motion to approve the minutes of the Utilities Advisory Commission meeting held on June 7th?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay. Do you want to call the vote?
Commissioner Phillips,
Yes.
Commissioner Croft,
Yes.
Vice Chair Scharf,
Yes.
Commissioner Martyr,
Yes.
Commissioner Forcell.
I approve.
And that brings us to the Utility Director's report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Scharf. Good evening, Commissioners. Just a few items for interest tonight. First thing is that water quality. Each year, the Utilities Department publishes the annual conference consumer from the customers. All of you received a copy of it. Also, too, is that all customers throughout Palo Alto received this postcard. That if any of them would be interested to contact our customer service number, and we would be more than glad to hand out the water quality report. It is also on the web, so all the information is on the website as well. We've had a numerous amount of calls come in this last about a month and a half now for scams. We've heard that some customers that have contacted by a person pretending to be someone from the City of Palo Alto Utilities to take actions to receive rebates, such as for high winter bill energy bills. And the scam tells you to press a number or a button on your phone to receive the rebate. As they may recall, every resident utility customer received a rebate on the high winter bills already for their electric and for their gas rates. So we are putting warnings out as these folks are trying to scam these individuals. Also, too, is that I've mentioned this a few times now, is that we are still in the planning stages to launch the new outage management system before the year end, which will improve our way to respond to power outages and providing timely notifications and updates to our customers. Through this new system, we'll receive notifications through texts, phone calls, and emails. We're hoping to actually have this in place by October. So that is our goal that we had set ourselves for this. And we're hoping that this will actually improve better communications to our customers as on OWL. A little bit about the drought update, SFPUC. Month. Palo Alto's lifted the 2-day-a-week water restriction. The state left some water restrictions in place, including no washing of hardscape, no watering within 48 hours of a rain event, and a ban on use of drinking water to irrigate decorative grass at commercial, industrial, institutional sites. So there's an outreach over the coming months that will focus on making conservation on California way of life and Palo Alto's permittable water uses restrictions through the education and workshops that we'll be holding in the coming months. Also, too, is just a recap of spring landscape workshop in the past few months. CPAU and the Bay Area Water Conservation Agency, which is Pauac, has hosted a series of spring landscape workshops. The topics covered including how to water trees, steps for designing and conservation of lawn to drought tolerant landscaping, and also installing rain gardens, plus available rebates on some of the items that through them as well as through ourselves. Just upcoming event is on July the 8th. No, sorry. What is it? The 6th. Sorry, July 6th. Saving money with EVs and EV discount campaigns. And the workshop can be found on our website /workshops. And then the big event coming up, just to remind everybody that next Saturday, the 15th, is going to be the open house for the municipality. It is from 9 to 2 on that. There'll be food vendors there as well as free ice cream. We've asked all the departments to be involved, which they will be this year. And so we're hoping for a large turnout, which we think we will have hopefully a few more than what we had last year. We had about 350 folks that showed last year. So it was a good turnout, but we're always striving to get more folks involved and to come out and see kind of behind the scenes of, and the employees take a lot of pride during these this open house. So we're excited about signage is out already, has been out next to the yard at the municipality center. You can see it from the freeway sides. We've done a lot of advertisement on this. So we're hoping to see everybody come out. So that's Saturday, July the 15th. And with that, that concludes my report.
Thank you. Commissioner Mountner, did you have a comment or something? Oh, so you didn't push it.
Oh.
That's why I asked you.
Oh, I thought you meant that I pushed this. No,
No.
I did not push that.
No worries.
I misunderstood.
All right, moving on. Let's see, we have new business. So we have a staff recommends Utility Advisory Commission recommend the City Council approve participation in the Go Green Energy Home Financing Program. Do we have a staff presentation?
We do. We do have a presentation on this, just a little bit about the Go Green. This is we feel is an important program that we want to move forward with. We think that this is going to be one way that customers can get maybe a little bit lower rate on interest to be able to do some electrification and other types of projects that they might be able to go through. This is the first time that we're going to get into this Go Green. It's a state-run program. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shiva Swaminati, who is our senior resource planner. Thank you.
I'll ask for public comment really quick. This is Janelle Camion, program assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item 2, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. No hands raised.
Okay. So then we have the staff report.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Shiva Swaminathan. I'll be presenting to you on this Go Green Home Financing Program. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the Go Green Home Financing Program? It is designed for residential customers to support them in financing projects related to electrification and energy efficiency. It was authorized by the CPUC, California Public Utilities Commission, back in 2017. And it's administered by the agency of the Treasurer, State Treasurer's Office, the California Alternate Energy and Advanced Transportation Financing Authority, CAFTA in short, to support and supported by the investor-owned utilities. It's available to all the investor-owned utility service territory residential customers. And the program recently was approved to become available for utilities like Pauac if we plan to join. And staff hereby recommends that we join the program to provide access to this financing mechanism for Pauac residents.
Get a little closer to the mic. Thanks.
Is this better?
Better. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Okay, next slide, please. So listed here are the different consumer benefits. It's for loans for projects from residential customers on energy efficiency and electrification programs. There's no money down required or no collateral. You can finance up to 100% of the project cost, up to $50,000, a 15-year maximum term. Now, typical unsecured loans, these lenders provide no more than 5 years of term and typically about $25,000 in funds. But because of this loan guarantee, or at least loan loss reserve, they're able to extend these terms for longer duration than for larger amounts. And the rates are competitive at 4 to 8%, 4% if it's a shorter term loan, maybe up to about 5 years. And the interest rate tends to be higher for longer term projects. And it's a consumer loan, unsecured consumer loan. And it also depends on the credit rating of the customer, credit score of the customer. There are more than 40 qualified contractors who are enrolled in the Go Green program. So the customer can access any one of those contractors in the Bay Area to do their projects, and the financing would be paid directly to the contractor with no out-of-pocket cost for the customer. And then up to 30% of the loan amount could be used for unrelated renovation costs. Next slide, please. So how does the program work? CAFTA manages this public-private partnership. And what you see there on the screen is there are 5 players in this endeavor. There is a utility, which has 2 functions. It funds a loan loss reserve, and then it also communicates and coordinates with their residential customers on the utility programs, as well as this financing available to the customer. And the customer, in turn, can go to the Go Green website and look for contractors on different different projects the customer wants to do, and contacts them, one or several of the contractors, get quotes, and based on the quotes can apply for a loan to the credit union. And there are 2 credit unions which are servicing California Coast Credit Union and the Matador Credit Union, and we're working with several other credit unions to be enrolled in the program. And once a loan is approved, the contractor begins work, and upon completion, the customer certifies completion of the project, and the loan is dispersed to the contractor, and the consumer takes on a unsecured loan from the credit unions. Next slide, please. So what's the role of the SCAP? It's a source of funding for residents for both homeowners and renters who want to undertake electrification projects, whether it be the small heat pump water heater program, which is relatively a small cost item with out-of-pocket costs of about $2,000, or when the program expands to all home electrification. So we are hoping to set up this structure so that as we expand our program, this becomes a source of funding to finance projects. And then KTFA has many financing programs, one for commercial, one for multifamily. So there are a suite of financing programs, and we could potentially have access to those down the road. Now, there's a cost to participate in the program. It's a $50,000 startup cost plus a $40,000 per year on admin costs. The loan loss reserve, we need to contribute 16% of the loans disbursed as a loan loss reserve. And city contributes only to the loans made by the credit unions within city boundaries. If and when a person, the loan loss reserve, when they experience a default, in practice, it's limited to 16% of the loans. But in theory, when in the tail end of the program, when programs wind down, if and when they wind down, it could potentially be slightly higher for the remaining outstanding loans. And then, of course, credit union checks credit rating, credit scores of the customer to reduce the likelihood of losses. Okay, in terms of timeline, we completed negotiation of the MOU with KTFA back in February. In April and May, the SCAP committee reviewed and recommended approval. We are here today with the commission. And then upon your recommendation, we plan to go to the council in August, and this facility will become available to Palo Alto residents in the fall of 2023. So staff's recommendation to the UAC today is to approve the participation in the Go Green Home Financing Program and to approve the use of city's cap and trade funds to cover the costs of the program. Thank you.
I have a couple questions. Can I go ahead? Thank you for the presentation. Sorry.
Sure.
I had two questions. One of them is, you mentioned renters could apply,
Yes.
and I didn't remember catching that when I read it. So I'm curious how that works with, I understand it's a consumer loan, but
Correct.
does the landlord have to be involved somehow? That's the first question. And the second question is, there is mention of data collection. And I'm just wondering if it's possible to share out to us periodically, what are people taking the loans for? Like, what kind of projects are they undertaking with the funds?
Sure. For the first question, yes, if it's an appliance loan for an upgrade in the home, then there has to be the renter has to have some agreement with approval from the owner of the property. But ultimately, it's a renter, or depends on. And yes, KTFA has lots of data, and we can get data about in aggregate what percent of loans went to different types of programs and what type of customers, but not customer specific data, but in aggregate, yes.
So the type of things that people are doing to upgrade for electrification, we might be able to see.
Correct.
Great.
Correct.
And would something like a car qualify, or it's only really home electrification plus the 30% of non-related?
Correct. Energy
Okay.
efficiency projects like building envelopes or pool related or lighting or equipment, HVAC, heat pump water heaters. It does not cover EV chargers or EVs or solar.
I have some questions. You mentioned 2 credit unions have signed up for this. Do people need to physically go into one of these credit unions or join the credit union in order to be eligible?
No. So these are all online applications, and you don't have to be a credit union member to apply for a loan.
Okay. And who makes the underwriting decision on who qualifies? Is that is the individual credit union? And then how is the risk split? If there is a default, is our risk limited to the 16% that has been contributed?
So yes, the credit union is responsible for the credit check, and it is their loan. They would follow procedures as they normally would. The backstop, the credit reserve will cover up to 90% of outstanding loan amounts, up to 16% in the pot. So in the early, currently there are a portfolio of about $50 million of loans, about 3,000 loans in their portfolio. So they have about $8 million in loan loss reserves. So when we join, we would contribute our share of 16%.
Each time there's a loan, you contribute 16%?
Correct.
And that's held by the credit union or that's held by the state?
The 16% will be contributed by the city of Pauac utilities.
But who would hold the money?
It'll be on an escrow account for different credit unions held between KITFA and the credit union.
And what's the benefit of this program overall? Is it that it gives lower interest rates, or that people can get loans who would not normally be able to get an unsecured loan? Or is it because unsecured loans are not very common, I guess?
Correct. It's both. It's both. So one is the unsecured loan. The other is the duration of the loan. 15 years, typically unsecured loans apparently are only up to 5 years. And then the amount. And then also they provide lending up to 580 credit score, which is on the low end of spectrum.
Yes.
So, and then yes, the interest rates are apparently lower compared to it would have been otherwise.
And we don't have any good idea about how many people in Palo Alto might be interested or might qualify.
That's an unknown at this time.
And just one last question. I don't want to monopolize. How long has this program been in effect? And, I'm sorry, actually my question is, are the startup costs and the administration costs listed here? External costs, I guess a startup cost money we have to give them to join the program, or is it a cost that we bear internally for staff working on this? Same with the administrative costs.
So what's outlined in the report is what we pay through the MOU. We'll be paying KITFA to update their staff effort, but it'll be part of our promoting electrification technologies to our customers. So the promotion will mainly be through our existing channels, but there will be some startup related staff effort in this, which will.
And is the thought that this would ultimately supplant the heat pump program, and how does it work with the heat pump program? You plan to run both of them?
So it's going to be promoted through the same channels. And the heat pump program is a relatively low-cost program for the customer, for residential customer, $2,500 out of pocket in that range. And the minimum loans under this loan facility is $2,500. And the average from the existing loan portfolio is about $17,000. So we don't know the market for the heat pump water heater program, but it'll be promoted through that channel. And then as we ramp up to other heat pump, space heating, and other electrification application, we expect the uptake to get higher.
And final question, I guarantee it. Is Palo Alto, are we in charge of the programs that can get funded, or is that mandated by the state in this case? Could we say we want to fund this, but not that? Or is the state already laid out the menu of what can and cannot be funded?
Yeah, that has already been laid out by the state.
I see. Thank you.
Just a few quick questions. Most of what I had to ask has already been covered. But just to clarify, this would not involve on-bill financing.
Correct.
So the lending relationship is between the lender and the customer.
Correct.
Okay, and so the utility's role is to promote.
Correct.
And so you did mention it'll be sort of through the same channels as, for example, the heat pump water heater program. Can you remind us what does the city do to promote?
What are those channels?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have the home efficiency genie and who promotes the heat pump water electrification program. And then we have Synergy, our contractor, who goes and installs the system in the homes. Now, Synergy is an approved contractor under the Go Green financing program. So the work they do can be done with no out-of-pocket cost to the customer to the extent they need financing.
So it could complement the existing heat pump water heater. Okay.
Correct.
And then genies, if they're doing
Broader.
an audit, can mention or include in their materials that this financing is available.
Right. Or mainly we are thinking as we expand our suite of programs for heat pump space heating, which could cost $20,000 plus. It's that time our whole home electrification. That's when the project costs become larger and this instrument will become more useful.
Okay. But at this time, there's no plan for like bill inserts or mass emails or social media advertising?
No, I think that's how we promote the home efficiency genie and the heat pump water heater program. So that will be another channel of promoting it as well.
Okay. Were you going to say something,
Yeah,
Dr.
no,
Batchelor?
No.
And is this available to multifamily residential customers as well? If an apartment building owner wanted to do an upgrade, could they tap into this?
Not
No.
not the multifamily apartment owner.
Okay.
But if there's a condo, a 1 to 4, a smaller condo, and the condo renter or the condo owner might be able to do that, but not for. They have another program called multifamily, Go Green Multifamily. We haven't. We are not participating in that program yet. But
Is
that's
there a
another-
reason why not to participate in the multifamily program?
They haven't worked out the systems to open it up to non-IOU customers for that yet.
Okay. But is it safe to assume staff is keeping an eye on it?
Yeah.
And when it comes available to
Yeah.
munis like ours?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Five-year term. Now so that's the ask.
So that's 400,000 a year.
Right.
Because the staff report, I thought, maybe I misread it, but I thought the staff report said you'll come back every year. to ask. So I misread that.
Well, the budget would be approved every year, but this is a MOU, approval of the MOU.
Right.
which
So
is
we're
a
going to have an
broader-
MOU and we're going to agree to spend up to $2 million
Correct,
of Palo Alto money.
correct.
And how does that money break down? What are you doing it with it?
So up to 500,000 in administrative costs over 5 years.
So that's
and
up 100,000 a year.
50,000 the first year, 40,000 per year in the second year 1 and 2. And then the costs for the administrative costs by KITFA will be the year 3, 4, and 5 is not determined yet.
So why would it be, if it's 50,000, 40,000, why would you need 500,000? You
So
need
it's so the first
250.
2 years, it's 130,000. So 40, 40, and 50,000 startup.
Okay.
So 130. And then year 3, 4, and 5, we are saying we don't know the amount, but up to, say, it could be 50 or 60,000 per year in the next 3 years. So there might be another additional 150,000. So there
That's
might be.
still less. You're at 300, aren't you? Did I? You're doing it
Correct,
so
correct,
fast. So
correct.
if you're at 300, why do you need 500?
Well, we wanted some in the approval process, we typically ask for a upper limit and then negotiate terms as they present themselves.
And what is the administrative cost? Is it Palo Alto just paying for the bank to administer this for the credit unions, or where does that $50,000 in administrative
Sure.
costs go?
Sure. It is KITFA's administrative cost. The state run, they have contractors, they have people who promote the program, maintain the website, maintain the bank accounts for the.
So do they negotiate these separately with each, municipal owned utility? Like, is Santa Clara going to pay the same as we are? Or do they negotiate it separately and you negotiate what you're based on population, or,
No, it's based on incremental cost. So they have the baseline cost, which they are currently incur to run the program, which has a $50 million portfolio currently. The first 2 years, it's on an incremental cost basis to bring Palo Alto on. What's the incremental cost estimates? And we discussed that, and there's a methodology which is outlined in the contract, how that is determined. But that determination of the administrative cost pass-through has been approved only for 2 years currently. And then year 3, 4, and 5 would have to be worked out in the future.
So you're going to have an MOU
Mm-hmm.
that lays out the 50,000 at first, administrative cost, basically.
Correct.
And then there's another 50,000 the first year, right?
There's 50,000 as startup costs and 40,000 a year for
So it's-
administrative.
And that's in the MOU. So it's 50 and 40 for year 1, and then 40 for year 2.
Correct.
And then 3, 4, and 5 are not spelled out.
It's not spelled out. Correct.
So we don't know. So
Correct.
wouldn't it be more appropriate, rather than approving the money now, to approve what you need for the MOU, and then you can come back and ask for it?
That could be an option, but that'll be more administratively.
But it's more oversight. It's more really the job of the city council and the UAC.
Yep.
It'd be administratively easier for us just to say today, go spend whatever you want, guys.
Yeah, I
Right.
can see what the point you're making.
So that was the first point. The second point I had is, I guess, how does it? You have credit unions
Mm-hmm.
that are going to make the loans,
Correct.
right? And we have some language in here about interest rates somewhere between 4 and 8. We have historical interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
Interest rates have gone way up. Are these subsidized interest rates or not subsidized interest rates? Because right now the yield curve is actually an inverse yield curve. If I go get a 10-year loan,
Mm-hmm.
my rate is lower than if I get a 5-year loan.
Right.
So this doesn't show that. This shows the opposite.
Correct.
So is this a market rate? So tell me what's actually happening.
Okay, so there is why is the interest rate higher for longer term loan? Is that one of your questions?
No, my question is, if I go borrow money today, there's an inverse yield curve.
Right,
So that means that if I borrow money for 10 years,
right.
the money is cheaper than if I
Correct.
borrow it for 5 years.
Yeah.
That's not what the graph shows here. At least
Ye-
by looking at the graph, it seemed to
Yes.
show me that
Yes.
that was a higher interest rate for a longer term loan,
Right,
which is historically the way yield curves
Right.
work,
right.
right?
So I think.
My question is, are these subsidized loans, are these market rate loans given the person's credit score and that, or how is the interest rate determined?
Okay, so to answer your first question, this is an unsecured loan. So as the term of duration of the loan increases, the credit risk increases. So that's part of the reason why a longer term loan has a higher interest rate, unsecured credit risk. In terms of, what was your second question?
No, so my question is this, are these subsidized loans or non-subsidized loans?
It's a market rate loan as determined by the credit unions, which they can provide given the loan loss reserve mechanism set up by the state.
So if I went and did this loan today,
Mhm.
what would my interest rate be? Say it was for 5 years.
Okay, so they do publish some statistics.
Well, is that a statistic or what the loan would be today? I mean, is it looking backwards? I mean, look, interest rates were really cheap,
Mhm.
right? Interest rates are now expensive.
Right.
I don't know what a mortgage costs these days, probably 6.5, could be more, 7, somewhere in that range. I haven't tried to get one recently. So the question is this data, when I see 3.74, 4.5, 5.2, 5.4, when I see any of the numbers on here,
Mhm.
I don't believe them unless they're subsidized loans. Now, again, I understand the state guarantees this. So the credit union's not out money, right? The
Mhm.
credit union's not out, right? So the credit union is getting, 100% of their money back, right? So
Correct.
they should
Well,
be
not-
able, can they loan it at a risk-free rate, the same as a treasury bill? I mean, what is actually going on in terms of, if I go to the credit union and try and get this?
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to basically, what I'm trying to get is, I don't want to have happen is, I say, yeah, this is fine. And the next thing I know, right, the credit union is charging people 9% for these loans, and we're talking about 5% loans and spending all this money.
So on a monthly basis, there's a report which is also linked in the report. We could potentially go to the website and look it up. But the report I have here from March 2023, which talks about average interest rates for the loans made over a 60-month period is 4.1% for this facility because of the loan guarantees or the credit enhancements. And the rate without Go Green Home, they are providing it at 10.6%. So that's
Sorry, say that again. So the rate's 4%, but without it's 10%. What's
10.6%
10.6%?
is the interest rate they would charge for a similar loan for a unsecured loan without loan guarantees. And this is again, the credit union reporting that this is the like for like comparison. And then another statistic they provide is the 640. They provide typically do not provide loans for credit for customers with credit for less than 640, but this one provides up to 580. And there are 127 out of a total of 3,000, which is between 580 and 640. So they do publish statistics, which shows the value this schema brings about. And the report is by the state treasurer's office.
So they're backwards looking. I mean, they're
Correct.
right. So, I mean, what you're telling me is we have no idea what the interest rates would be today.
There is published rates. Currently, you can go on the website and see which is what is reported.
For today, for getting a loan right now.
Correct.
Can we go on the website?
Sure.
While we do that, maybe it seems to me, is it correct that what's happening here is we're providing, or this program is providing a 16% risk guarantee to the credit unions. Then they're taking that and saying, wow, instead of, a 1% default rate, I can live with up to 16%.
I don't think that's what's happening. I think they're getting 100%.
No, I don't think they are. I don't
They're
think that's what
getting
he said.
90% of the outstanding loan amount up to 16% of all loans. So in year one, we provide 16%, say there are 100 loans made, 16% is what we provide, and there's 100% default. We are out of pocket for all 16%, but the credit union only receives 16% and not the whole. 90% of their funds, which will make up the 16%. So they are not, now that there is, but that's hypothetical because they have now $8.6 million sitting on that reserve. And they thus far from 2017, they've used up $400,000. Again, that's backward
So
looking.
it's a risk subsidization, and then it's left up to them to determine both the underwriting limit and the rate at which they want to offer the loan, correct? They're not making any.
So the only subsidy, so what's really going on then is we're doing 16% of all the loans. So if they have a loss on one loan and it's less than 16% of all their loans, Palo Alto covers it 100%.
If it's a Palo Alto loan, is that correct?
Correct, for Palo Alto loans.
Okay, so we're really guaranteeing 100% of the loan, assuming we don't have more than 16% of their portfolio goes bad. Would that be a fair statement?
Okay, so
And they're Palo
16%.
Alto loans.
And they had to be Palo Alto loans.
Yeah,
That
they
would
have to be,
correct.
assuming they're Palo Alto loans.
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay. So we're the ones basically
And that's
providing
the
the,
subsidization from when you're asking is that how do the rates, its rates are based off of, because we're going to subsidize that
right.
low.
So they're not taking a lot of risk.
No,
So that's what I was trying to get at, and maybe I was doing it poorly, but what I was trying to get at is that if they're basically, given that risk, they should be basically 100% covered. I mean, unless the default rate's more than 16%, right? If the default rate's greater than 16%,
Right.
they're on the hook.
Right.
And it's
Right.
historically been 4%, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
yes.
Yeah. So then that's why I'm saying it feels like,
Right.
so the question is, are we getting a fair deal from the credit unions in that, are they actually giving lower interest rates
Yeah.
than, and a lower interest rate to me would be something at least equivalent to the risk-free interest rate, or maybe a little bit more, but not much more, right? And looking at the historical statistics is not helpful because rates have moved so dramatically
Right.
that it doesn't mean anything.
True, except that what you see in the website, in fact, I was looking at it today. This is what is published in their website under their loan term sheet as of March is the latest on the website. It has loans in the 4, 5, 6, 7, 4.99, 5.99, and 7.99, depending
Okay.
on the term. And again, they're indicative.
So that actually was my question, because those rates don't sound horrible, right? If that's what they're giving today, that sounds reasonable.
Well, I think the thing is that the rates themselves are great for with the utility standpoint. If they default, then we end up having to pay that portions of it. But to get them into a lower interest rate for a long period of time that's not secured, people might go after that and get something at, say, 5%. We'll just say is the average.
Right. And I think the only other concern I might have would be with basically older seniors and some renters, to be honest. I mean, a renter should not be getting a 15-year loan.
Right.
They just shouldn't, And so I don't know, do we have any safeguards in place, or are we just relying on the credit union to, and I'm a little worried about Palo Alto promoting this. I mean, obviously we should make it available and stuff, but I just worry about some older people, and the people that are going to take the loans anyway are the people that are going to have trouble paying for what they're seeking to do. And I worry a little bit that they get themselves in trouble. I mean, yes, Palo Alto backstops the credit union, but no one backstops them.
Right.
I mean, they go to collections or, all sorts of bad things happen to them.
Mhm.
The debt probably gets sold and people, I actually don't know exactly what you guys are doing with it. So do we have any thoughts on that?
So I think your concern is whether there'll be any predatory practice by the credit unions or that.
Predatory is a strong word. I would say this, that we're very gung-ho about getting people to electrify.
Correct.
We're pushing it really hard. We tell people it's the right thing to do. That you have some senior who can't afford it, or frankly, a renter who can't afford it, or just doesn't understand and gets themselves in over their heads about what they can afford. There's a default on that.
Right.
And, that person then spent the money because we made it easy for them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But then they have to somehow deal with the
Right.
consequences on that.
Right.
And,
Right.
I'm not saying it's a killer. I just say, have we thought about it? Especially, how are we going to be sending flyers to everyone's house that you should do this? This is the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do, and whether or not then people make financial decisions from which they cannot afford it.
Right.
I'm just asking if we have thought about that, if we have not.
I don't think we have. No, Greg, to your point, I don't think we've looked at it from that standpoint from our outdoor residents at that point. And I'm sure that the credit unions are not going to look at that as either with that. So I think, they're going to look and see if they can qualify. And if they qualify, then, they're going to get them the loan
Right.
at that point.
And I guess if they qualify, and they do some income verification and make it a whole
Right.
loan and
Right.
assume they can afford the loan, right?
Well, that's
Right.
what I was thinking is that, we haven't looked at that demographic in that older age, but I would think though that, as you just mentioned, they're going to look at, can they really afford this portion before they're going to give that loan up? Because again, it's going to default back onto them first.
I would also
These are
check if their
community credit
policy.
unions.
I apologize. Most unsecured loans have an age limit that most banks will not lend beyond,
Mm.
because obviously for an unsecured loan, it's a much bigger challenge. If somebody dies than a secured loan where you can go to the estate, you just lose. So at least some of the banks I've worked with, I don't know what the situation is in California, will not lend, period, to a person over a certain age, which would of course say, is this something that's not available to seniors? How do we communicate that? Or is that something that they're waiving for this program because of the risk?
I may be being too concerned. I tell you what would have given me some comfort. And this is really not a negative on staff because it's hard to think these kind of things. It comes from a different perspective. But I would really have liked you guys to say, we've looked at the credit unions' credit requirements. They're the same credit requirements they have for other loans. It's going to be this. It's going to be well policed. I mean, everyone's going to have that credit score. That's helpful, but they're going to have to meet their their income requirements that they normally would have to. These are what the income requirements would be. It's been an historical default of 4%. In this program so far, it's working really well. These other two cities in the Bay Area have signed up, and that we don't really have to worry about this. You may be right about seniors. I mean, I'm just thinking who needs these loans and who's going to take them for the most part, right?
Yeah.
I do worry it is people in Palo Alto who are, lots of equity in their house, but don't have great cash flow because they're retired, basically.
And I can tell you that, I think from staff's perspective is that, we were thinking more about how do we get something to folks that can qualify at a low rate that's going to give them some length on this so that they're not going to be strapped as we were pushing this whole electrification. And I think the thing is that, as Shiva mentioned at the very beginning, we don't see the cities because no city can do it. It's just a utility thing. So it's only to PG&E. They offered it out to their citizens, to their customers at that point. So I think the thing is that we didn't really, we've talked to those credit unions. We've looked at that. We looked at the rates. We looked at, what the business might look like. I'm not sure how many takers we may see from this. But I think we were looking at how do we try to make it as easy as we can as we want to move forward with electrification. And this was just one program that was available.
Does the
Yeah.
MOU have to say how many loans we'll give? I mean, I'd almost like to see it as a pilot. We go ahead, we do it, we say,
Right.
yeah, we're going to take up to 1 million loans and if $1 million worth of loan. And after that, we're going to look at this and see
Right.
what things, and you're going to report to us and say we did, 30 loans or 20 loans or whatever.
Yeah.
And this is how it's working.
Right.
And there's good bang for the buck. And it's that, and I'm just feeling like it's a 5-year MOU, you're signing on. We're going to, won't hear about it until the end of 5 years. We'll go spend 2 million and, and it'll just be one of those other programs we never remember again.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. We will come back as the uptake. We'll be reporting on a quarterly basis, and the quarterly report, to the extent the loans are being taken, and they'll report to us on the loans provided. So there'll be reports coming. And then currently the agreement is with the MOU is only for 2 years under the MOU to be extended at a later time. The approval we are seeking is to enter up to 5 years. So that without coming back to the council, we could extend it after 2 years. So that'll be based on performance. And this is a product as a portfolio of financing products available to the customer. It can be home equity loan, their own funding, but this is a tool available. And how much they're going to use it, it's unknown at this time.
So I'll tell you where I am, and then I'm going to just be quiet. I would definitely support this program for 2 years. I think that's a great idea. I think you should come back to council. I actually don't like the idea of 5 years with not coming back to council. I think that we should get, at least after 2 years, say, or, 6 months into 2 years before you need us to renew it. This has been the good parts of it. This has been the bad. This is what's happened, or it's been wildly successful. We should actually try and push a lot more money on this. We've managed to electrify this many homes. That's where I guess I'm
make the recommendation that we plan to extend or not to. But if the UAC feels more comfortable that there needs to be another formal approval after 2 years and not rely on staff's recommendation in 2 years, before we go and extend it, we could come and report to the UAC on our plans for the following 3 years. Would that give the commission comfort?
other commissioners.
I'm sorry, what was the exact proposal?
Well, it could be approval for only 2 years, and then I think Commissioner Shaft's proposal is approve it for 2 years and then come back for a further extension if it warrants so. Staff proposal is we need to work with, do our best effort. There's not going to be much uptake in the first 2 years, because so there may not be much to report either. And so we think there needs to be a 5-year term. But if the program is not going as planned, whether the lending is much higher rates than we anticipated, the uptake is not going to be that great in 2 years. So that's why we think we need the 5-year, and up to we could potentially limit it to a smaller dollar amount if that's the issue. But
why wouldn't you be able to tell us how the program's going in 2 years? I mean, your MOU is only
we
for
could
2
tell,
years.
yeah, if the commission desires, we could do that. But my estimate is the uptake is probably, if I make a guess, no more than 100 loans in a couple of years, and it'll be exponential after that when the whole home electrification takes off, is our projections.
Shiva, I think though that we could probably live with the 2 years and then maybe 18 months into it as we come back to the commission, and we'll give them updates periodically, but because we're going to have to renew the MOA.
Correct.
So we come back 6 months prior to its and come back to the commission and ask for, at that point, we'll see how it's going in, what's going on. And just make a decision, because maybe it's not worth it at that point either. So I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, we could live with that.
Is there any penalties to withdraw from the MOA?
There are no penalties to withdraw from the MOA. There is no penalties.
Okay.
And the merit of doing that is also it gives us more negotiating power for the 3, 4, and 5th year on the administrative costs potentially. If it there's no dollar amount allocated for the year 3, 4, and 5, but we might have to start negotiating that early if we have to come back to council. But perhaps a 3-year term. I'm just worried that there is not, when we have systems in place and when we start promoting it, the 2 years may be too short of a runway.
I just said 2 years because that was the length of the MOU.
Pardon?
That was the term of the MOU. And then you're supposed to come back. So I mean, you could still, look, I'm expecting you to come back to council and, like 18 months in, say we did 100 loans.
Okay.
I don't think anyone would think that was bad.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
then, and I think that's optimistic, right?
Yeah,
So
that's
even if
great.
you did 50 loans, right? You could tell us what they were, that kind of stuff, right?
Okay.
What it cost us. I mean, I guess I don't understand
No.
3 years beyond the MOU period, but I'm talking too much.
Well, I would just love to understand, I'm just looking back at the timeline that, I love this acronym, CAFTA and
Okay.
Palo Alto have already finalized an MOA back in February.
Correct.
Is this something that we've already committed to 5 years? And so the hesitation is to undo something that has already been agreed to?
We can,
We've done 5 years.
if the council, we could go and talk. Let me think about that. We could go back and say that it's for only 2 years. I don't know how they would react to it. But if it's our desire to do that, we can ask. But
So can you clarify what's the level of commitment that's already been made on behalf of the city of Palo Alto?
none these are just purely at the staff level that we'll seek approval, but there is no signed agreement of any kind. So
Got it. So would it be a little bit feeling like starting over to go back and say, actually,
no, not necessarily. There is a natural break point in year 2. So we could say at that time, we'll have to just go back to our council for approval. So we could weave that in. If
Is the MOU doesn't just re-up though after 2 years, does it?
correct, no, it doesn't.
So we would have to come back anyway.
Well,
So we don't have to talk to, I mean, we can talk to them
right.
instead of that
We have to approve it, but if
Right.
the city manager would approve it.
Right.
Here we'll have to come back to council to approve it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So currently it's the city manager who will be approving it after 2 years. If the scheme is different, then we'll have to come back to council for approval. So that wouldn't be, it'll be administratively longer period, but it's contractually, it would be fine.
and then my other question is, it sounds like there's a sentiment, I don't know, we haven't voted yet, but I'm also in the camp of it feeling prudent to return to council with an update on how it's going and to get formal approval 2 years in. And so then the follow-up question is, what would be the proposed budget figure at the 2-year mark that that the UAC would be recommending to council to approve?
It would be
There's a table in here somewhere, yeah.
we currently have 850,000. But I think that's currently it's 130,000 is what we were projected to spend, but we'd asked to spend up to 250. And then in terms of loan loss reserves, up to 600,000. So 250 plus 600,000, 850,000.
Well, yeah, but if we're only going to do 2 years, you only need $130,000 plus a loan loss
Correct.
of 16%. The loan loss, if you did 200,000 on the loan loss, how many loan, that would be total of, I'd have to multiply by 0.16, right?
Right.
Divide by 0.16, right?
Right. So if it's $1 million,
So it's $1.2 million. Unfortunately, someone can do math over here. So it'd be 1.2 million. That's probably enough for 2 years. If you do $1.2 million worth of loans in 2 years, that'd be impressive.
oh yeah, that will be ample.
So you probably only need $330,000.
So that's 106. So give me the math again, please.
Well, it's 130, right? Because you have your 50 setup and then your 240s,
Right.
right? And that's 130.
Right.
And then you have 200,000, which gets you $1.2 million of loans.
Correct. Yeah. So 330,000.
Yeah, go ahead.
The table 1 that's provided here,
Mm-hmm.
it's 41,250, not 50. Okay, right?
Yes.
A startup.
Yes.
And then the
41,
ongoing
250.
fixed costs are at 30K.
Right.
Is that plus
Right. So it's
the variable?
sorry, the loan loss reserve is variable. Yes.
Right, so, okay, so his fixed costs are actually much lower.
He needs less money.
He's 100K. 100,
So you need
Okay, very
300K is what you're saying.
Yeah. So it's 50K plus 85K. 135K. And then $160K if it is $1 million of loan. That's close to 300K.
I guess I'm missing why we are not following this table and I guess the thing that's missing for me is what's the total risk? If we were to just look at the 2-year NTE amount, that column, that's the not to exceed. So assuming you do a lot of loans, would we be comfortable with that, saying that we want them to come back still after 2 years? We don't think it's going to go gangbusters quite that quickly in 2 years, but there already is a not to exceed. And then I don't know if I got that exactly. What's the upper limit of the risk for us if we did get to that not to exceed number?
Sorry, repeat that.
So if we did, I'm looking at table exhibit 3, the 2-year NTE amount column has 250,000 in estimated administrative funds required. And then it has 600,000 in total estimated credit enhancement funds required for a total annual funds and MOA NTE budget of 850,000. So that's the column. And that's like assuming you have just a lot of loans, right? That's the not to exceed
Correct.
number. So we already have a limit on
2 years.
what we would do over 2 years. And
Correct.
so what is our total risk to Palo Alto if we exceed, the default rate is way higher than expected?
Right. No, it won't be, it will be that 600,000 for loans. We'll stop issuing, if the loan amount exceeds 600,000,
Right.
600,000 divided by 1.16%. That amount, they'll stop issuing loans after that. It's unlikely that.
And our risk is 16% of that number, basically?
Correct.
Okay.
No, sorry.
It's not.
So 600,000 divided by 16%. And that's.
Oh, that's the
amount of
total.
loans.
Okay. Okay. Got
3
it.
points. Thank you.
Okay. So 600 is the risk.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. So would we be comfortable with the 2-year, just saying that we are okay with this 2-year budget, but that we want to hear back with
No.
6 months
I-
before?
I
You're
would
not okay
I
with
would
it?
not okay with
Okay.
that. That's why I just went through the math.
Got it.
If they're only going to do 100, their first year is 100,000. Right? I mean, their first and second year in administrative costs is 100,000, right? So I said, first year and second year is 100,000 in admin costs. And then if they take another 200,000, you divide that by 0.16, and that was $1.2 million,
Got it.
right? That would be more than ample.
Instead of 10. Yeah.
And look,
okay.
if this goes completely gangbusters and you're thrilled with what's going on, you can come back and ask for more money, right? I mean, it's not like you can't do that. People would love to hear that it's going gangbusters.
Can you
in
help us
terms of-
understand your hesitancy?
Mine?
Yeah, if it's going gangbusters, why would they have to come back? Like,
Well-
what are we afraid of if like this?
Me, like Megan, I think pointed out to me that historically, when they've done this, there's not, you focused me on it. There's not that many loans. It'd be very strange suddenly, like,
It does seem like there's been 3,000 loans over a 10-year period of the existing program. Did I read that correctly?
Mhm.
And your projections here are for 1,000 loans just from Palo Alto. So I just don't think that's realistic.
No, it's not 1,000 loans
1,000 over, yeah, right, over a 5-year period.
for 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, but it's for all of California versus for Palo Alto, right?
Right.
Look, I'm very supportive of the program. I think that the loan, you'll be lucky if you get 50 loans in a 2-year period. And so I probably think that there's not going to be much to report, and we will simply renew it going forward. But if it would make the other commissioners feel more comfortable, certainly hearing how it's going and identifying places where, as a commission, we can support
Right.
these efforts or provide advice on how to promote them. Maybe there's value in returning to the commission for that reason alone.
I think I see the value in part. Am I on? I think I see the value in part. So as the memorandum is written, we're authorizing up to $100,000 in administrative costs in year 3 and year 4. I kind of worry about the other side. What if we're dribbling in 1 or 2 loans? It's not really that effective, but they want to increase the admin cost to $80,000 a year, which apparently they can do unilaterally, at least my reading of the memorandum.
Not unilaterally. It is subject to city manager approval for year
Okay.
3, 4, and 5.
But, in that case, I'd also like to hear, yes, it's going gangbusters. I also like to hear, well, we did 4 loans, should we keep this up? And, I look at the heat pump project. I know it's going to take off, but it's been a long runway. And I'd really want to look at it again in the context of, that program and other programs we have too. So 2 years sounds right to me. 3 years I'd be okay with, but given that the term of the memorandum is 2 years, that seems to make sense.
no, I think you make a really good point. It dawned on me as well that if we do 3 or 4 loans, the administrative costs are huge.
Yes.
comparison to the amount of loans, we shouldn't
Correct.
continue the program.
Except for whether it remains whether the expectation is it's going to take off or not. And so, yes, on if first 2 years, I don't know whether if 50 loans are approved, and we expend $150,000, that's $3,000 a loan. Whether that would be a metric to discontinue the program.
Can I just ask why you expect it to take off so strongly? So in year 3 or 4, like why?
We don't necessarily expect it to take off, but the number of projects which has to happen and which we'll be promoting would be larger. What the demand for this loan, and again, residents have many avenues for loans and financing, where this by itself would take off, we have no idea, but we just want to make it available.
I guess my personal belief about this is that this will take off. And here's the reason why. And the reason is that even though that there hasn't been that many loans over the period of time of 10 years, the thing is there hasn't been a city that has been electrified. As much as we're pushing electrification and how much it's actually going to cost, $50,000 to $60,000 to $70,000 to electrify homes, where are these people going to go? As you said, Vice Chair, is that yes, a lot of folks in Palo Alto are rich they have a lot of investment in their home, but they're not having a lot of cash on hand. And the question is, do they want to go in and go after some of those monies that are going to get a higher interest rate than probably what this interest rate is going to be able to get them? And the thing is that depending on where their age bracket portion of it is, it's a 15-year loan that you could spread out, that you're not spending. I can get $50,000 over a 10-year period of time that maybe I can afford $200 a month. So I think that, and the reason why we were thinking years 3, 4, and 5 will be such critical pieces of this is because electrification really is not going to hit those strides until that period of time. Right now we're planning. Next year, we're hoping to get some equipment in. Right now, we're also doing a conversion that we've talked about going from 4 kV to 12, and that's going to be the area from the pilot, which is about 500-600 customers that are going to be looking at the electrification. And the thing is that if electrification takes off, then I think this program goes. This program, electrification doesn't go off, and we don't make some other changes. I think then at year 2, that's why I agree with your analysis around looking at this a year 2, that we probably won't get very many. Maybe I would think maybe if we could get 25, it might show. Other than that, though, I think it happens in years 3 and 4 because it's going to take us to build the overhead somewhere to about 26, 27 over the overhead. All the overhead will be upgraded at that period of time, which is about 65% of our customers, 45 are below ground. So that's when we'll go back in and start looking at the undergrounding sections at that. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at from a timeline standpoint.
No, I think that's fair. And I think I wanted to add one thing to that. I actually think it's helpful for you to set the expectations at 25 loans or over 2 years or whatever, not this huge number, because if you want the program then to continue, you want to say it was successful. Whereas if you set it at, we're going to do 50 loans or 60 loans or 100 loans or 200 loans, people are going to be like, well, you only got 20 loans. I know. So yeah. I actually do think you should try and, when you talk to council, I think asking for the money we're suggesting, or at least I'm suggesting, but is a better sales pitch, frankly, than you didn't spend like 2/3 of the money we offered you.
Yeah, point well taken. Just another to add to Mr. Dean's observation of taking off. This whole program has been in existence since 2017, has financed $55 million of programs. In the month of March alone, they did $2.39 million, almost 5% of all the loans was made in the March. So it has been growing, at least the state program. So it takes time. And we just want to set up the infrastructure so that it is available for customers if and when they need it.
I have one more question.
Go ahead.
I'm totally new to the whole grid modernization, as you saw, in the last meeting. And I guess one question I have is, if people want to undertake a full house electrification at this point, is that problematic for us? Or how, because having the loan kind of is an encouragement to do that. And, since we don't think it's going to take off very much in a couple of years and we're really ramping up the electrification in later years, would it make sense to just do this 2 years down the line rather than now? And I'm not advocating for that. I'm just asking the question and is there some benefit of doing it now? Do we already see the need for the loans now? Just kind of thoughts on that would be interesting.
So I think it's twofold from my stances, is that one is that, we are going to be starting on, as I mentioned, we're hoping to have this pilot up and running by the end of the year. So there's going to be 500 or 600 homes that would be ready to go and be electrified. I think the other thing is that we have to think about, we took reserves to fund the heat pump water heater in this year's budget portions of it. We're not doing that next year. We cannot continue to subsidize customers with this heat pump water heater program. And so I think that this is just another avenue of allowing them a way to maybe to do that. The early adopters are going to take advantage taken out for this heat pump water heater. Now, granted, if we don't do 1,500 water heaters, the cost will be saved as well. But that was based off of those 1,500 water heaters as our goal. So, but I think that those are the twofold reasons why I think that we would probably not try to wait for 2 years down the road. Because I think then at that point, once we do this pilot, it looks like it's going to work, then we're going to continue to restart rebuilding then at that point. And like I said, I think the thing is that 3.5 years from now, most of the electric will be, almost all the overhead will be done at that point. So 3 to 4 years, it'll be complete.
Anyone have any other questions? Help me with crafting the motion here a little bit, because I could take the recommendation and then would it say a term up to 2 years, and would it say not to exceed 300,000? Is that? But because you had the 850 here, but here you have 2 million. That's why I was confused of how
Right. Right. So
how I translate this into what you sort of had in the recommendation.
Yeah. So I think the broader recommendation of not to exceed $2 million, if that could be, you want to say 300,000? Is that what you?
If that's the right number, because I'll tell you why I was a little concerned is I want to give you the right number. And in your documents, you had 850 as the budget. And here you have 2 million. I couldn't translate the 850 to the 2 million in my head. So I wasn't quite sure what, because that's over 5 years. Is that why?
Yeah, that's one's over 5 years.
Okay, so that's why it's 2 million. Yeah, so it would say 2 years, 300, right?
So I had 330,000. If you're thinking 200 loan facility, 40 plus 40 plus 50 for the startup. That to my mind was.
So wasn't the table different? And that's why it wasn't 40 plus 40.
That's correct. The table is different from the numbers.
So look, I'm not going to argue about 300, 330, but it's.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with, so 50 plus 85 is 135. And if it's $1 million of loan, it's $160,000.
Right.
So 135 plus 160 is less than 300,000. So.
Okay, so we'll say 300. That's fine. So that would be the motion then. Should I read it out that I would make?
Please.
Need a second. So it's.
But quickly, just before,
Sure.
in the event that it takes off, there's a provision or staff understands that there's the option to come back to expand the program
Correct.
before 2 years. I just
Correct.
want to make sure that if it's
Yes,
going
yes.
gangbusters and the loans are good loans and it's all for
Yes,
good cause, that
yes.
we don't shut it down
Yeah.
after 8 months because of this meeting.
No, I mean, I think we definitely understand that the commission's wishes on this is that, we would, if it does happen in month 7 or 8 or 9, we would come back and say, projections look like this. We need to move forward. We need to have X amount of dollars. We're still within the 2-year range. We're just going to ask for the extension of the dollar amounts for the loans.
I think particularly if the loan support of 200,000 gets exhausted somehow because it's so successful, absolutely before that happens.
Right.
Come back.
Exactly.
So do you want me to read the motion, or it basically would be the recommendation on the first page, but instead of saying a term up to 5 years, it would say 2 years. And then instead of not to exceed 2 million, it would say not to exceed 300,000.
Yep, that would work.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Staff want to call the roll then?
Commissioner Phillips,
Yes.
Commissioner Croft,
Yes.
Vice Chair Sharf,
Yes.
Commissioner Mater,
Yes.
Commissioner Forcell.
Yes.
We'll call the meeting back to order. I guess now we have a discussion of the electric supply portfolio modeling results.
We do. We have a presentation from Senior Resource Planner Jim Stack, and he's actually going to be online. So
Okay. Do you want to do public comment
we'll
first?
probably ask public comments.
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 3, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. No hands raised.
All right, shall we proceed?
Good.
I see him talking, but he's muted.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. And can you see my slide and hear me talking now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Sorry, we're in a new setup here. Anyway, my name is Jim Stack. I'm here to present some modeling results we have for you from our electric integrated resource plan. And before I get started, I just wanted to quickly acknowledge the team I've been working with on this big project. I've been working very closely with my colleagues, Lena Perkins and Shiva Swaminathan, whom we just saw in the last presentation. And over the last few months, we've also been working very closely with a team of consultants from Ascend Analytics. And Ascend is a great group. They're a very well-respected and well-known consultant group in our industry. They focus on, they specialize in this sort of modeling analysis that we're doing with them on portfolio optimization. So we actually have a member, the leader of their team, his name is Brandon Mock. He's on the line with us tonight. If you should have any questions about how their model works or the assumptions that they made that fit into the model. But before we get to the modeling results, it's been roughly a year since the last time I was here to speak with you about the integrated resource plan. Since that time, of course, we've had a few new commissioners join the UAC. So I thought it'd be helpful to have a quick refresher on what an integrated resource plan actually is, and then to give you a quick update on our long-term load forecast, which has changed recently, and then also give a quick overview of the current portfolio of electric supply resources that we have, just as a refresher. And then we'll dive into the modeling results. So with that, what is an integrated resource plan? An IRP is basically an analysis framework for developing sort of a long-term roadmap, which tells you how you should best meet your forecasted demand through a combination of different supply side and demand side resources. So it's a staple of long-term planning in the electric utility. And an IRP has to consider a number of different kind of boundary conditions or factors that kind of constrain it. The first is the loading order, which is essentially your order of preferences of different types of resources. For us, that says that energy efficiency and demand side resources come first. It also has to, of course, meet all of your regulatory and climate goals, and then it takes into account customer preferences, and then, of course, cost and risk. You're trying to achieve the least cost and least risk portfolio of resources. So that's kind of a quick overview of what an IRP is. So now moving on to our load forecast. So back in December of last year, my colleague Lena Perkins came to you and presented our long-term load forecast. And the graph she presented, you can see on the screen here, there's a low scenario, a mid scenario, and then a high scenario. So back in December, the low scenario and the high scenario that she presented are exactly the same as you see on your screen here tonight. So the difference in our forecast is in the mid scenario in the center graph, which is the mid scenario is the one that we are actually going to be adopting and using for all of our analysis going forward. And the version that you're seeing here tonight it has a big jump compared to what we saw back in December. And the difference is primarily in that the orange shaded area, which is called additional load. And essentially what that represents is some additional load that a couple of our large commercial customers have told us that they are anticipating bringing online due to some facilities they're putting into place on their sites. And when they came to us initially, maybe a year ago, and showed us their projections for how much load they would be consuming, we were a little bit skeptical that they would bring all of that load online. So we kind of downgraded their numbers a little bit in our forecast back in December. But over the past 6 months, as we've seen those projects start to get built out, we've started seeing some load coming online from those projects. And the numbers that we're seeing are a little closer to the numbers they initially shared with us. So we've kind of bumped up that orange section of the graph to reflect that, the reality we've seen over the past 6 months. So you'll see in a few slides, the impact that additional load will have on our procurement needs, but it's pretty significant.
Can I just, do you want us to wait till the end for questions, or would you like us to ask them as we go?
I'm fine with you jumping in to ask questions as we go.
Okay. I have a question about those two commercial customers. This was a highlighted area of question was, we've assumed that there's a kind of a fixed load that comes in by 2026 or so, and it stays there for 25 years. Can you give us a sense for those, if that's really two commercial customers, and what's their longevity in Palo Alto so far, and your sense for their commitment for being here and taking that load for 25 years?
I might defer to Director Batchelor on this. I'm not sure how much I'm able to share about these customers.
So we are pretty confident that these two companies that are coming in are well-known companies. We think that there will be long-term partnership with both of these companies, and they bring the majority of this load in that they had talked about, as Jim mentioned. Early last year, we weren't too sure if they were really going to be able to take as much as they are, but I think though that they've signed long-term leases in the areas, and we haven't really talked too much about it yet. And that part of it is that we still need to talk a little bit more and come back to you when we actually get the agreements. We're still working on the agreement portions of it with our legal department as we speak. So I prefer not to share that with all of you quite yet, but it will be coming, and we'll also be able to tell you approximately what each one will bring from the table standpoint. But they're data centers. They're bringing data centers, and so data centers are good for us in that aspect.
So data centers 24/7, pretty much base load consumption.
Base load, but one of the companies will actually be also a research on that. And so, and then with all the research they're doing, that's the reason why the data center portion of it. Because usually, they're unmanned, they're 24/7, but these two, both data centers will actually be manned, but they won't be manned just for the
There's a lot of growth over the next few years from that sector due to the projects that Director Batchelor just referred to. But then beyond that, longer term, we actually expect to see a little bit of higher rate of growth from the residential sector than the commercial sector. And that's due to the fact that we're anticipating that the bulk of the new load that we're going to see long term from EVs and from building electrification will occur more in the residential sector. So that share of our load will actually increase as a fraction of total load over time. So moving on now from the load forecast, this is a table showing the existing resources we have in our portfolio. They're kind of broken into different categories based on resource type. So at the top of the table, you can see we have a few. We have one wind project in the late 2020s and into the early 2030s. Below that, we have a big group of solar resources, which those contracts all extend out into the 2040s. Below that, you have the new Calpine geothermal contract, which was just approved very recently, and that is going to start operating or start delivering to us in 2025, and that runs for 12 years. And then finally, the bottom two resources are our big hydroelectric resources. First one is Collierville, and we are a partial owner of that facility, so that'll remain in our portfolio as long as it's operating, unless we were to lay it off. And then the Western-based resource, which is our contract with the federal government. That one, of course, is our largest single resource in our portfolio. And we recently executed a new 30-year contract with WAPA, the Western Area Power Administration, for that contract, which will be starting in 2025, that new contract. However, we have until July 1st of next year, 2024, to decide whether we want to maintain our full share of that contract or decrease our share or get out of it entirely. So we have another year to make that decision, basically, and that'll be the subject of a future presentation that'll be focused on that.
Can I interrupt with a quick question?
Certainly.
On that table, can you help us understand the net qualifying capacity? That it's really variable as sort of a fraction of the nameplate capacity, and I would have expected it to be pretty similar per resource type. So how is that calculated?
Yeah, so I was going to talk about net qualifying capacity in a couple of slides, but this is a good place to introduce it, I think, too. So each resource has, kind of the nameplate capacity, which is, the maximum amount of power it can produce at any instant in time. And then net qualifying capacity refers to the amount of capacity that each resource qualifies for under the resource adequacy rules of the state. And it does vary quite a bit. And that is partly due to the fact that, well, some resources don't even qualify for any capacity at all. So you have a couple of zeros there for our solar resources, whereas the other ones get a pretty good amount of NQC. For solar and wind, the amount of net qualifying capacity you get is for new resources coming online. It's a pretty small fraction of the net nameplate capacity. So that's why
it has to do with when they were introduced.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
Place when the resource came online. So that's why the Rosamond Solar has much lower NQC, because that's a brand new one.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's nothing physical, so to speak. About
no, the NQC amounts actually change year to year based on the actual production of the resource and when that production occurred relative to when the grid had its peak, when it was at most in distress. So the numbers do fluctuate a bit, but the rules, the counting kind of conventions are sort of in place for each resource.
Okay.
Going forward.
And Jim, one other very quick question. I know we've had some past discussion about bringing resources offline because of transmission and fire risk that it poses. Which ones are those, if you don't mind reminding me?
I don't think.
Am I misremembering?
I think shutting down things during wildfire risk that happens more on the load side. I think it depends on where the fire is. If there's a fire in like a transmission corridor that's where one resource feeds into the grid, that resource would be affected. So I wouldn't say there's any particular resource here that is
Okay.
kind of more, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this next graph shows a long-term look at our load projections and our energy from all of our different resources. So this is a load resource balance graph. At the top of the graph, you can see the impact of the recent change in our load forecast. The dashed line represents the load forecast that we shared with you back in December, and the black line is the new load forecast. So you can see that shift upward by a little over 100 gigawatt hours per year results in the portfolio being short on energy about 8 years sooner in time. So we do have significantly larger gaps to fill and significantly earlier because of that increase in our load. Other than that, you can see, as the contracts kind of expire over time, they come out of the portfolio. It is, of course, possible when a contract expires that we could renew the contract, but those discussions only happen kind of as you near the end of the contract term. We have to discuss that with our supplier, and we don't know what the terms of those contract extensions would be at this point. So for now, we're just assuming that a contract expires, it simply leaves the portfolio. And the next slide shows two graphs which present kind of the same information, but here it's a monthly load and resource balance look for two particular years, 2025 and 2035. So the 2025 graph basically reflects our current portfolio with the Calpine geothermal contract included, because that starts that year. And what you see is that because our portfolio is has such a high concentration of solar and hydroelectric resources, we end up having pretty significant energy surpluses in the summer months, and then pretty good deficits in the winter months. And if you jump forward 10 years to 2035, you can see several changes there. You can see that the wind contract and most of the landfill gas contracts have expired by that point in time. If you look closely, you can see that the hydroelectric bars, the blue bars, are a little bit shorter. That reflects the change in our projections for hydro due to climate change over time. The Calpine geothermal contract is actually bigger in 2035. It doubles after the first 2 years of that contract. And then you can also see that the load forecast line has shifted upward a good amount. And so putting it all together, what that means is you have, we still have surpluses in the summers, but they're a lot smaller, and you have a much bigger gap in the winter months to fill. So those last slides were all about the energy and load forecast. This next one shows a capacity balance over the long term. So the black line represents our projection for our system resource adequacy requirement. So that's basically our peak demand plus a 17% planning reserve margin is how we get to that number. And then you can see that unlike with the energy graph, on the capacity basis, we are looking pretty good until the late 2030s. We actually have a surplus of capacity. We can kind of sell that surplus into the market to monetize it. This is kind of a reflection of the fact that we adopted our resource adequacy program back in 2008, and we adopted a accounting convention for our resources at that time, and compared to the new rules that are in place for newer resources.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm sorry. Could you go back a couple slides to the monthly energy balance?
This one?
Yes. So when you do integrated resource planning, is your goal to make the total area represented by the bars equal to the total area under the load curve? In other words, you're not really trying to match the resources with the timing. Is that correct or incorrect?
It's not. Yeah, it's something that we definitely consider. We kind of have to match, as you said, the area under the curve. We don't exactly have to match it on a monthly basis. It is sort of preferred because when you have large surpluses and large deficits that kind of offset each other, like we have now, you are exposing yourself to market price risk.
I'd also say there's exposure to market prices, but I also say from an environmental point of view, what fills those gaps? Is that gas turbines, gas combined cycle, or is it something else? You can take it from a marginal or average point of view.
Yeah, I'd say typically the resources to fill that are probably going to be combined cycle gas turbines. So yeah, they are kind of filling in during the winter months, and we are sort of putting our additional clean energy onto the grid in the spring months to kind of balance or kind of offset that the environmental impact of those combined cycle emissions.
I know it's impossible to nail down, but are these the gas turbines that our governor has kind of extended the life, the combined cycle gas turbines extended the life on recently?
That we don't really know.
Yeah.
When we make purchases kind of on a monthly basis to hedge our portfolio to fill in those gaps, we don't really have any insight into which resource is supplying that energy. We just buy kind of a generic product at a trading hub. So it's a little bit unclear to us where that energy is actually coming from, but you can probably assume it's from some combined cycle turbine.
Certainly at the margin, correct?
Yeah, at the margin. Yes.
And what does it look like by day if you broke down the load here over, say, 24 hours? And again, how would the matching of the supply and the demand look?
Yeah, I don't have that slide with me tonight. We do have that information that we can provide to you, but we have a lot of solar that generates during the day, so we have large surpluses during the daylight hours, and then our hydro resources are actually very helpful in that typically the load during a given day really peaks in the evening hours, which is kind of when solar resources are, supplying less energy. They're kind of shutting down. That's kind of when the peak load occurs. But our hydro resources can actually, kind of concentrate their energy into that period where the grid is really in need of generation. So that's very helpful in terms of grid stability, and also you get the best prices for the generation in those hours when it's most valuable. And then in the overnight hours, we do have gaps, typically in the late night and early morning hours.
And I don't see any nuclear in here. Nothing is bought from nuclear by us, is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Nothing is really for sale either, exactly. Is that correct?
Not at this point, although I'm going to show a slide in a few slides showing some of the resources that we're considering on a long-term basis. And there's a lot of work going on right now in small modular reactors. So we are going to, we may take a look at those in the future, but at this point, there's nothing really available in terms of nuclear.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right. What you can see here is that it's typically solar and wind that are the least cost resources, and those prices are actually expected to come down until about 2030 and kind of level off at their minimum point there, and then start to increase in the late 2030s. And I think that is kind of due to the effects of the Inflation Reduction Act kind of kicking in and driving prices down for a while before the subsidies kind of go away. Let's see. We also have a couple resources here that are sort of more speculative. I mentioned small modular reactors a minute ago. Those are shown in the yellow line at the top of this graph, but those are still kind of a long way from commercialization. So that number is sort of, I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that number at this point. We'll have to evaluate that as it becomes more realistic. Same for the offshore wind line, the blue line kind of in the middle there. That's the project. This project's still a long way off, and we'll have to see where their costs and what their timing actually is as we get closer to them.
Are these actually fully new projects? So they're being invested in and built out at this time? I was just kind of wondering why we don't see hydro on here, and maybe there's just no new hydro projects. So what gets a project onto this slide?
That's correct. These are the projected costs, kind of the capital costs, sort of you said, we're not seeing any new dams going up in the West at this point. So we're not, including new hydroelectric resources as sort of an option in the portfolio analysis that we're doing today. You do occasionally see, an existing resource have a contract expire, and then an opportunity could arise. We had one of those for a hydro resource a couple of years ago that we chose to not invest in. But yeah, so those are kind of one-off hit and miss opportunities.
So is it fair to say you can't rely on those opportunities ever arising? You pretty much, as you're looking at resources in the future, you have to look at new developments.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, that's our approach. The next graph is kind of similar, but it's for capacity type resources, basically storage, battery storage, and demand response. So here, the trend for storage is kind of similar to solar and wind, where costs are expected to come down over the next 7 or 8 years, and then kind of stay kind of low during the 2030s, and then start to rise again. And demand response resources are kind of expected to kind of, follow an upward trajectory, kind of following inflation rates, more or less. Although demand response is a pretty, limited resource. There's not a whole lot, it's kind of hard to get a lot of demand response capacity, within Palo Alto.
Can I ask a question about this graph?
Sure.
I was intrigued by the y-axis being labeled cost per kilowatt month.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah.
I'm struggling with how to compare that price to, or those costs to dollars per megawatt hours, because I assume it's not a straightforward translation where you just figure out the hours in the month and go from kilo to mega. So why is that the measurement for storage? And what's the right way to think about what that storage can offer if it's offsetting power generation?
Yeah. So the reason that's presented that way is because those are, capacity resources where you're kind of investing in, a physical object, and it's not really producing any energy. You're putting energy in and getting slightly less energy out. So that's the reason it's not presented in a dollars per megawatt hour basis, because it's not actually producing anything. You're just paying to use that resource, and so you get capacity value from it, from using it for meeting your RA requirements or selling the capacity from it, and then you're also able to kind of arbitrage the energy prices, the cost of the energy going in versus the revenue from the energy that's coming out, hopefully at a higher price.
So maybe put a different way, I think it's not like how does storage work wasn't the question. It was just like, how much of it do we need? What are the drivers for investing in batteries at this? Like, is there a trade-off with investing in storage versus generation resources? Are they just completely separate, and we are either have a regulatory requirement or otherwise to invest in storage?
Yeah, they're pretty much, I would consider them totally separate. So storage, a generation resource provides energy that, adds to your resource mix. Storage, because of the efficiency losses, that actually, is a net consumer of energy. So the reasons for investing in storage are partly to meet your capacity requirements, so regulatory reasons, for RA purposes. And then it's also partly, kind of a value play, essentially. If you can, you look at the cost of the investment, the dollars per kilowatt month compared to the revenue you get from the RA, as well as the energy arbitrage value, or you can sell it into you can use the storage resource for frequency regulation in the ancillary services market. So it's kind of a profit motive along with a regulatory compliance motivation.
Can you comment? I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
Could you comment on why it's so costly for demand response? Here, you mentioned it being Palo Alto. First of all, there's about 70% of our consumption commercial, and do we have any interruptible contracts or priority contracts with commercial, or is this all on the residential side? And I'm also a little surprised because I thought by the end of the year we would have AMR and the potential to do some creative things here, but it seems like there's not a lot of attractiveness there.
Yeah, I'm not a demand response expert. I don't know if Shiva is still available, but my understanding is that this would all be commercial customers. We've had a demand response program, kind of on a pilot basis in past years. And it's been, maybe not super cost effective. It does require a lot of, staffing and, kind of overhead costs to keep it going and maintain its reliability, a lot of communications with the customer. So yeah, I'm not sure what else to add to that, unless Shiva or Director Batchelor wanted to jump in on it and say anything more about that.
Yes, so it's on demand response. It's a matter of what makes it worth the while for commercial customers to curtail. And this is commercial customer driven primarily for Palo Alto, given that 80% of our load is commercial customers. We used to pay $50, $500 a megawatt hour for commercial customers. This assumes we might have to pay $2,000 a megawatt hour or 20 cents. Or $2 per kilowatt hour. And that translates, when you translate that back to dollars per kW month, it turns out to be these numbers which are shown here.
Okay, thank you. I'm a little surprised that we don't have more effective demand management potential, but I'll save it.
I actually was very interested also in seeing the hourly curves because I wasn't even thinking about these arbitrage or financial opportunities of the battery storage. I was more thinking, we're looking at 4 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, which I'm assuming would get us, we have all this if we're really going for honest, clean energy, I would think that we wouldn't ever want to have to buy, gas-powered energy if we could avoid it. So my thought was that that's the purpose of these batteries is, bank some energy during the day and then you can use it during the night instead of having to buy power that's dirty power, right? And so, just thinking of energy as fungible, right? People all over are doing the same thing, like needing the energy in the evening when they don't have the sun shining. So would it be, is that not what we're trying to achieve with these batteries? It's more of a financial play. Can you just comment on the hourly and how, because that's what it looks like, 4 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours that we're trying to optimize when we're buying or, what's most useful to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so for the battery dispatch strategy, I would say that first of all, we don't have any batteries in our portfolio currently, but if we did, we would be dispatching them on the basis of the market price signal we were receiving. So you can think of that as kind of an energy play or a value play. But really the market price is reflecting the grid's need or lack of need for energy. It's also a reflection of how dirty the grid is at any point in time. So generally, if you have clean energy or energy from a clean energy resource that's stored in a battery, you want to be putting that onto the grid during the periods when market prices are highest. Both because it's most profitable as well as because that's when the market price signal is telling you the grid is the dirtiest and it needs the energy the most. So that would kind of be our strategy for utilizing batteries.
And how do you translate this graph into the financial potential of the energy? sorry if I saw that in the package, but this is like the cost, the capacity cost. Is this already considering like what the value is to us of, I assume like a longer battery is more valuable just because it gives you the option of dispatching it anytime over 10 hours instead of 4.
Yeah, it's more, well, yeah, this, to answer your question, this graph doesn't show anything about the value or the revenue side of the equation. This is just looking at the pure cost side. And yeah, you're correct that a 10-hour battery does give you both a greater amount of capacity that you can count in terms of the resource adequacy requirements, as well as more energy that you can store in it, so more energy you can get out of it. But with a 10-hour battery, you're having to charge it for 10 hours. You're having to buy more. You can't kind of focus on the 10 or with a 4-hour battery. You can just buy in the 4 least expensive hours and then discharge in the 4 most expensive hours. So you get the kind of the biggest delta. With a 10-hour battery, you're buying in a little more expensive hours and selling in a little bit less expensive hours. So there's a little bit, you get more value, but not as quite as much of a bang for your buck. Not as quite as large a delta. And then I also wanted to mention, sorry.
I had
On
another
this-
question about projects. Sorry to go back, but were you continuing on the same topic on this slide?
On this one real quick, I was also going to mention that in terms of storage, it's pretty far out. And so unclear what the eventual cost of that type of resource will be, that we didn't include it in our analysis or on this graph here. But our friends at the Northern California Power Agency, they are investigating a couple of pumped hydro projects in the area. So we'll be taking a look at those down the road.
I have one more battery question before we switch to the other. Sorry. So the kilowatt months, does that sort of encode some notion of the useful life of the battery or how the battery is used if, as Commissioner Kraft suggests, they're being used on a daily cycle versus a
variable or metric that we use. A given storage resource is typically able to be charged and discharged like 1 full cycle per day. So we would, as long as it's kind of economic to, if it's worth the money to, to charge it and discharge it, we would probably be doing that like every day. And those contracts.
Okay, and I think that was the answer to the question I asked 2 times ago about why this metric. That is the market standard as it's traded.
Correct.
On the capacity market. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And then Jim, just one other quick question. I recognize the labor burden of running a DR program. Going forward, the DR programs are likely going to be very important and could be very cost effective relative to batteries. Do you have a long-term plan to sort of grow a DR program within the department, or plans to outsource elements of DR management in the future, or is that just not part of your planning at all?
I don't know what our long-term plan is on the DR front. At the end of the presentation, I indicate that one of our next steps is to begin investigating that going forward. So
yeah.
I'm not sure what our concrete plan is at this point.
Okay. Great. Well, we can talk more about it at the end, but thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
And I apologize to go back, but to the question of the projects that you showed on the prior page, have we ever considered or would we ever consider any projects here in Palo Alto? So any kind of investment in solar here or anything that we could harvest from wastewater treatment? I just am curious whether there's ever anything that's on site where we would generate our own.
Yeah, so we do have a feed-in tariff program in place, which is a program that allows us to buy energy from kind of larger solar installations that are put in place here in town over a long-term basis. And we have that program's been in existence since I think 2012 or so, 2013. And we now have about 3 megawatts worth of solar under contract. The challenge with Palo Alto is there's no really open land that's available to put in a big, generation resource. It's such a built out area. From time to time, we've looked at, a city, the city installing something, maybe down at the treatment plant or in the golf course parking lot or something like that. So that's something that we may consider in the future. But basically, we're so, land limited that it's hard to get a project built that's a decent size that kind of pencils out given the cost of the infrastructure and the land. All right, so I think that covers all the assumptions that I had to share with you. So I can now finally get into the meat of the presentation. So I'll share some early modeling results that we have from the work we've done with Ascend. And I want to, heavily caveat this, of course, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So hopefully this information will be useful, but please don't, get too attached to any of the numbers that I'm showing you on these slides. This is just kind of one look at what an optimization model says that we should be investing in over the next 20 years or so to kind of fill our energy and capacity gaps. This doesn't mean that, if you guys like this presentation, we're going to immediately start going out and, trying to acquire new resources. We're going to, continue to evaluate the market and our needs, as we go forward. And anytime we actually do have, a need for procurement, we will, of course, go out and do a big competitive solicitation of the market and see what we come up with. So these are just based on assumed costs and with Ascend was take a look at our existing portfolio of resources and use their model to kind of project, what the value of all of our different projects is going to be over the next 20 years. So this table shows those results for each of our different individual resources. The first column is the cost of each resource. That's sort of the contract cost we pay, the PPA cost that's already been negotiated. And then the next three columns show the different revenue streams we get from each of the resources. There's revenue we get from selling the physical energy into the grid, and then there's the revenue we get from the renewable energy credit, the REC, and then there's the capacity value of the resource for resources that qualify. And so you add up those those value streams and subtract the cost, and you get the mark-to-market number, which is the net benefit of each resource or the net value. So this slide shows that looking at a 20-year horizon, and based on the assumptions that we're making and Ascend has made about where energy prices are going and RECs and capacity, it looks like for the most part our resources are generally pretty profitable overall, so positive mark-to-market. I think if you add all that whole column up, you get to a value of about $14 million per year as the net benefit of our current portfolio. So that's good news. Of course, we obviously don't know where energy, REC, and capacity prices are going to be 20 years from now, but that's our current projection. And unless there are any questions about that, I can get into the more exciting stuff, the capacity expansion results. So on this slide, I'm showing what the model thinks is the optimal set of new capacity additions to add to the portfolio to meet those gaps that we showed a few slides back that we have. So this graph shows new resources that we're adding to the portfolio year by year in terms of their nameplate capacity. So this is not their net qualifying capacity. This is just the nameplate. So for example, the model is telling us we should add 25 megawatts of solar in 2030, and then another 25 the year after that, and then some additional solar in the later 2030s and into the 2040s, and then eventually out in the 2040s also some storage capacity. So the impact on our portfolio is kind of the focus of the next few slides. So this slide shows the capacity balance, the long-term capacity balance, like I showed before, but with the new resources added on the top of the bars, the stacks of bars. So again, we are kind of capacity long in the early years, and then as contracts expire, we get a little bit shorter, and then we start having deficits in the 2040s. You can kind of barely see the impact in terms of the capacity, net qualifying capacity for the new solar resources that the model is suggesting we should acquire. Those are shown in the very light yellow kind of speckled bars at the top of the graph starting in 2030, which are very small. And that's because they're so small because new solar resources don't really add very much in terms of a grid reliability impact. That's because there's already so much solar already operating in the grid that adding new generation during those middle of the day hours, the solar generation hours, doesn't have very much benefit. So you don't get very much net qualifying capacity credit for those new resources. Storage, on the other hand, does have is seen as more valuable to the grid. So those gray speckled areas on the right are pretty substantial. So basically, the primary reason I think the model is having us invest in those resources is because we start to, our contracts expire and we primarily why we have a lot of storage added to the mix later in the planning horizon. So the next graph shows our annual load and resource supply balance, so the energy balance. And here you can really see the impact of the solar in the grid on the portfolio. So this is really the reason the model wants us to invest in so much new solar capacity, is to kind of fill in those gaps as our existing renewables contracts expire. They really help us meet our load. This one on the right hand side at the very bottom, you can also see the little gray bars in negative territory. So that represents the kind of the net losses of storage resources. So where if you put 100 megawatt hours in, you typically only get about 85 or so megawatt hours out of a storage facility. So those negative numbers there represent the losses due to the storage resources.
Maybe I missed it, but what happens to geothermal in 2036?
That contract is just a 12-year contract. Starts in 2025 with a 5 megawatt share for us for those 2 years, and then a 10 megawatt share for the next 10 years after that. And then it goes away currently.
And you're assuming it's not available again, or it's crowded out by other alternatives?
Yeah, we're assuming it may be available again, but it might be available at a higher price, which would have to compete with the other alternatives. So yeah, we'll have to take a fresh look at it at the time when it is set to expire. We'll compare it to the other things available to us at that point.
Thanks.
Sure. And then next, this is a monthly look at the portfolio. The graph on the left is for 2025, which is just basically our existing portfolio. So it's the same graph as before. And then jumping way out to the end at 2045 on the right, you can see that all of our wind and landfill gas contracts have expired quite a bit earlier than that, and most of our existing solar resources, those contracts have expired as well. So it's primarily the new solar resources that are showing up and helping us to meet our load by 2045.
And demand response is so small, it's not visible, is that?
I think in this model run, it actually didn't pick up any demand response. It didn't show us, having any demand response in the portfolio, just investing in storage, because demand response wasn't, didn't pencil out. It wasn't as valuable as storage. So I'm going to skip over these next couple slides because they're nearly identical. It's just another model run. It didn't change very much without storage in it, and I don't think it will be something that we would look to do. So getting to the end here, basically our initial findings so far is that the Western base resource contract, it looks to be pretty competitive. That'll be the subject of a different presentation, as I mentioned earlier, so we'll get more into the analysis on that one later, but our initial look at that one is that it looks pretty good. As you saw from the previous few graphs, the model tends to prefer that we contract for new low-cost resources, basically solar, standalone solar. And then in the later years, as we become capacity short, it adds storage in at that point in time. One thing we are kind of questioning at this point is because as you saw from the monthly load resource balance graphs, solar is not the best fit for the portfolio. It kind of exacerbates our summer surpluses and doesn't really help very much in the winter deficit problem. So we're kind of looking into whether the model might be overestimating the value of new solar, new standalone solar. The cost projections for new resources, we are expecting to see solar and wind and storage costs come down over the next few years. So that may be a good time for us to go out and try to contract for new supplies for the portfolio. It's also when we start to have some sort of shortages, so we need to fill in some gaps. So our next steps, as I mentioned, we're going to continue to tweak the model and work with Ascend to make it as good a reflection as possible for our portfolio and the way we tend to, our preferences, the way we operate our supplies, manage our supplies. We'll also do some more analysis specifically on the Western base resource contracts to try to get a sense of how valuable that resource is. As I said, you can expect us to see start looking for new resources in a few years, and hopefully we'll be able to see find some new base load resources or flexible resources that are a better fit for our portfolio shape, our load shape. And then, as I mentioned earlier too, we're definitely going to start doing some more investigation of demand side programs. As we have the AMR stuff coming online, we'll definitely want to institute a time of use rate to encourage load shifting to the solar hours when we have surpluses. And we'll also take a look into other programs like demand response that might be help improve the flexibility of our load. So in terms of the IRP process, I'm expecting to come back to you guys another time in the fall, probably September, October, with some additional analysis results. And so we might have a different, portfolio plan to share with you at that point in time. And we're also going to have some supply cost data with the preferred plan when we bring that to you. And then I'll be taking that final report to the Finance Committee and then the City Council this fall, because it needs to be approved by the end of the calendar year per state requirements. And then over the next few years, we're going to continue to evaluate and solicit new resources. And as I mentioned, start to work on our demand side program as well. So that's all I have at this point. If you have any more questions.
Thank you for that. Question?
Yes, Jim, this was a great presentation. Thank you for humoring those of us who have gaps in our electricity grid modeling. I have a quick question about the fraction of the, well, look, it seems like the largest sources of uncertainty here are often on the demand side. You've done a lot of work around the mid-level projections, and yet we've seen those change really quickly. We know that there's lots of push towards electrification, and always it's hard to anticipate future demand. When we think about those demand projections broadly, I assume that these are currently aligned with our SCAP decarb goals broadly, and that's kind of where you've reflected the high end of the projections. And that's what you've based them on. And then the low end are probably business as usual. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And so, planning for the mid-range scenario is fine, but is there a cost of planning for the mid-range scenario instead of the high scenario that we might be incurring by not just planning for the high scenario? Do you know what I mean? Like if you're planning, you may have regret in these decisions long-term because you haven't adequately resourced, especially during the next couple of years when you have probably unusually low prices.
Yeah, I suppose there's always a risk in undershooting and not jumping on attractive prices now if prices go up in the future. But on the other hand, there's also the risk that you overshoot and prices go down, and you have to sell those. You have a lot of excess resources you have to sell kind of at a loss. So we're trying to strike the best balance that we can. We think in the high scenario, the electrification and EV load numbers shown there are extremely aggressive, and those would be very difficult to hit.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Can you help me also understand what is the fraction of municipal load in these? Like load that municipal services consume within the city? You track that?
Yeah, we do. My recollection is that municipal load is around 5% of our total load.
Okay, so it's not huge.
Yeah, it's not huge, but feel free to correct anybody who knows better.
Okay. And I'm sorry, Dean, did you want?
I was just going to say, Jim, no, that's right. It's 5-6%.
Okay. And then the time of use, is there time of use pricing in commercial contracts already?
For our commercial customers?
No. Yeah.
The rates? Dean, do you have an answer to that one? I'm not entirely sure if we have any customers on a TOU rate.
There are a couple of large commercial customers on TOU rates.
Okay. And then, sorry for all the questions, but do you also have as new commercial customers come online, do we have the capacity to charge marginal prices for new commercial customers? I mean, these are negotiated rate contracts, right? So, I mean, you can simply, from a utility perspective, are we legally allowed to charge what the marginal price is of that additional capacity?
I don't know the answer to that, but my sense is no, the rates manager is not here, but my sense is no, it has to be cost-based.
Okay. Well,
provide
is it marginal cost-based or average cost-based? This is my question. Average. It has to be average cost-based.
But you could provide for demand response, you could provide a signal, which is a marginal load.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay. And then in terms of, again, I'm sorry to belabor this, but I definitely think that the demand side programs are really important and are sort of in your current models pretty pessimistic in terms of prices that you would have to pay. And I think it'll be increasingly easy for load flexibility to be realized by commercial consumers as well as by residential consumers. And I'm just wondering how sensitive the model results are to some of those pricing assumptions on the DR market prices. And if you've done any sensitivity analysis on that.
I don't think we've done that kind of sensitivity analysis. My sense is it's probably pretty sensitive to the assumptions.
Yeah.
The amount of capacity that we have in there, kind of the limits on capacity are pretty small for demand response. So it, it might, if we lower the cost, it might pick it up, but we are assuming kind of a small amount at this point. So, until we, see, a greater amount of demand response, capacity forthcoming, that's kind of what we are assuming at this point.
Right, but I mean, your DR capacity is going to also change with some of the assumptions baked into like the high load models. And so your capacity there could be much larger, right?
I'm not sure.
Or maybe not. I don't know what the experience is of like Ascend and other markets, but it seems. Something to think about. I don't want to belabor it, but I would maybe, especially as you're exploring those demand side programs, doing some sensitivity analysis around cost and some sensitivity analysis around the portfolio of growth and how that affects your DR capacity might be beneficial. Thanks.
Thank you.
Couple quick questions. For the batteries, do we assume that we mean you would own the batteries and do the dispatch, so there'd be capital investment involved, unlike I think most of these other alternatives? Or are we assuming there's battery storage on the grid that we can purchase?
For now, we're assuming that the batteries will be owned by the developer of the battery. Someone else would own it, but we would have control of it. We'd be able to dispatch it according to our preferences. So
it would not be a capital cost, would be an operating cost, but would be dispatchable by us, obviously.
Correct. Yeah. So a long-term contract for a battery. Yeah.
And the one area where I do think in the longer run, the DR could make a pretty easy difference is just getting people to charge their cars during the day rather than at night. Is that a significant enough, when they can take advantage of this solar that we're going to be doubling down on apparently? Is that something you factored in or could potentially factor in your model? And I know there's lots of work being done both at Stanford and Berkeley engineering departments on what's the amount of financial incentive, or should we keep people from doing it? But any thoughts about that, or is that something you could easily put in your model, or is it too trivial to bother with?
Personally, I'm pretty bullish on the potential for that. Maybe not through a demand response program, but just through the regular time of use rates. Even might be able to kind of incentivize that sort of behavioral change for EV customers. But at this point, we still don't have an AMR system. We're still developing time of use rates, and we don't have great data, I don't think, at this point from the real world about what the net impact of that will be. So I don't think that's something we can kind of nail down in this analysis. Maybe hopefully in a couple of years we'll be able to refine that and take a look at that.
Yeah, I think I'd love to see some of that analysis. I think we're changing from a world where, energy is cheap at night and expensive during the day to one where it's going to be cheap in the day and expensive at night. And people have not changed their behavior, and companies have not changed their behavior or gotten their heads around that world. So even people talk to me, I want to, charge my Tesla at night because that's what's good for the environment. Well, actually not in the new world.
Yep, definitely agree. Yep.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I just wanted to just comment and I guess ask a question. But when I saw the monthly charts in 2025 and 2045, I kind of was a bit disappointed, to be honest, to see those flatter sources of energy just going away and being replaced by solar, where the landfill gas, the geothermal, the things that are flatter through the year being replaced by, basically solar and hydro dominating our supply, which are very seasonal. And so as I'm thinking about, the environmental impact of the things that we're doing, I would love to see us try to, match our load better. Just, you mentioned that, but I'd love to see us try to match our generation with our load. As well as, I think demand response is totally something we should do to try to change the load, but seasonality is going to happen. And so I guess one question I have is, I would imagine that SCAP probably would have something to say, I would think, about where they'd like to see us getting our energy from. We know solar's totally clean. We love solar, especially as the cost is coming down, but do we want to try to better fit that load curve? And would it be possible to just run some, models that are flatter and see what the incremental cost is? I think as we're ahead of, a lot of municipalities, everyone's moving to be cleaner, but I could imagine, I haven't seen the assumptions on price and how much we think cleaner energy is going to become as we go, but it would make us less subject to market pricing if we were generating closer to our load curve. And so I would be interested in seeing, a model where we are kind of more trying to optimize for matching the load to the generation and see how much that costs us. And maybe if we were to assume that cleaner energy becomes, as everybody's trying to get it later on, would it save us money in the long run, just depending on what assumptions you're putting into the model? So I guess what I'm saying is I'd be interested in seeing some sensitivities on price with those assumptions.
Yeah, you read our minds. We're once we finish our the basic integrated resource plan, our next step, we're hoping to work with Ascend to do exactly the analysis you're talking about, where we look at the incremental cost of more fully matching our load and our supplies on an hourly basis. So I'm sure we'll be sharing that with you, in the coming months.
Excellent. Thank you. I really enjoyed this. It's really fascinating. And thanks for putting it together for us.
Thank you very much. It's great.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, for the presentation. It was fantastic. Oh, you have a question?
Sorry. Yeah, I did want to echo what Commissioner Croft just said about, and I'm glad to hear that it's already on the to-do list. And I guess my only additional comment would be, we're trying to do the right thing by not just by the city, but by the grid and by the state. And so I wouldn't be overly focused on Palo Alto's load curve in the event that our load curve is different than the region, because carbon savings are carbon savings. And my other question was it was very specific, but I thought of it as we were talking about time of use rates for commercial customers. And are they currently incentivized for what are the peak times in our current rate structure?
I'm not the expert on that. I think they're still in development, but I think the peak period we're looking at is like 4 p.m. to 9 p.m.
So Jim, I can take this question.
Thanks.
It's a legacy rate. We haven't developed a new one. So the legacy rate and commercial customer loads, we still peak between 4 to 6 p.m. And these are the legacy rates for commercial customers, which have a peak period of daytime, the evenings between.
Right.
So
there's no particular incentive to match a solar curve at this time. There's just an incentive to avoid grid stress in the afternoon.
But on the residential side, the rates we contemplate implementing in a couple of years when AMI is in place would have an off peak between 10 and 2 p.m., 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. and off on peak between 4 and 9 p.m.
Sorry, and that would be just for residential? There's no contemplation of doing the same on the commercial side?
Commercial side has a capacity component to it too. So that I haven't thought through that.
Okay, but that actually is a little bit where I was going next in thinking about electric vehicle charging, which I think a lot of folks think is one of the greatest potentials for load shifting. And for a lot of, on a practical level, that means workplace charging, and incentivizing workplaces to offer vehicle charging on site, which makes me think about demand charges and how there might be hidden disincentives for employers to offer tons of employee charging if they're worried about demand charges. Is that something that is already being thought about it or incorporated into potential commercial? Time of COSA is the time to be working on it, right? Because once the COSA is done,
Correct.
it's too late.
Correct.
Is that something that is being discussed in the cost of service study?
Yes.
I'm glad to hear that.
Just a quick question on solar plus storage. When you think about storage, there's going to be battery farms and they dispatch from a battery farm as opposed to putting batteries in Palo Alto. Was that the thought, or how does storage?
In terms of where the batteries will be located, that's still to be seen. I guess when we do a solicitation for storage, we'll evaluate where the projects that come to us, which could be located anywhere on the grid, preferably in a location that's has the best pricing and is where the storage is needed most. We could look at the city investing in a storage facility and kind of incurring the capital cost for that. So that's something that I think is on the table as well.
To add to Jim, on the customer side, with time of use rate implementation, if the delta between on peak, which is 4 to 9, on the residential side, 4 to 9 p.m., and off peak or the mid peak would be during the day. Off peak would be the day between 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. The delta in prices could easily may justify a storage at the residential customer to store energy during the daytime and dispatch at night.
So that's what I was wondering, actually, if our storage is really their energy to when they want to use it, and everyone pays the cheaper rate, basically. Okay. All right, thanks. That was just an informational item, correct? So I think we're ready to move on. So the next thing is commissioner comments and reports from any meetings or events. Seeing none, I think the next thing is adjournment. Oh, future topics. Any future topics you want to? Does anyone have just any future topics to suggest? Okay. With that, we'll move to adjournment.
Second.
All right. I'm just going to say, anyone who doesn't want to adjourn can stay.